Broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Good afternoon, everyone. Sorry I'm a couple of minutes late. My name is Luke Erzsébek. I'm Vice President, Atlantic Canada for Restaurants Canada, and I really appreciate you taking time from your busy day to tune in and get an update of what's happening in New Brunswick as a result of COVID and the food service industry. It's no surprise that we're living in unprecedented times. With what's happening, you've had your businesses forced to be closed since March 15th, and many of you are either closed completely or already opening partially. We've seen sales numbers that we've never experienced ever in the 75-year history of Restaurants Canada. So, in our role as Restaurants Canada, we have really a three-pronged approach to what we're doing and what our role is with regards to this crisis. Our first role is to understand the impacts of COVID on the restaurant industry and bring these and share these impacts with government. You've probably all seen some of our media stories, our press releases, where we talk about the job losses in the province, the 13,700 job losses in the province, the decline in sales, some of our issues, be it rent, be it the accumulation of debt, be it the need to have alcohol with takeout and delivery. That is our job to bring these impacts to government and to raise awareness to ensure that they do bring relief packages that will directly impact you. Our second role is to work with government on measures to protect the industry and assist the industry through this crisis. We've had, we're working with the federal government in Ottawa. I cover the four Atlantic provinces here. We have some boots on the ground in Quebec, in central Canada, and in Western Canada, where we're working day in, day out with governments, providing feedback, providing information, on what can help our industry. And when announcements are made, we continue to work with governments to get them, changed to help our industry even more. Because as you've seen, this is not a steady state. Things change daily. In some cases they change hourly. Announcements will be made, and a couple of days later they change them and they shift them. So that's our role to work with governments and get the feedback from you, the members, and bring them to government. And our third role, which is where we are now, is work with government on plans to how do we reopen. We've had some assistance measures in place provincially and federally, and now our job is how are we going to open? At some point we have to open. The province of New Brunswick has talked about reopening, and we're working with government on the best plan to reopen. Taking in consideration public health, risk mitigation, continued assistance, because it's not going to be back to normal like it was last year, a month from now. So there is going to be the need for continued assistance. And then how do we try to grow our businesses, when we are open? So those are essentially the three functions of what we're doing at Restaurants Canada with regards to this crisis. So, what I'll do today a little bit is talk to you about, a quick note on, some of the statistics in terms of what happened and the impacts on the industry. Secondly, I'll move on to some of the federal government programs, explain the most important ones, and take any questions. I'll talk about some of the provincial programs, assistance programs, and last but definitely not least is our plans for reopening and where things are with reopening. At any point, feel free to send questions to, you can text them by the sidebar, or on the front page is my email address or phone number. Feel free to send me an email, and I'll answer if I can. If I don't, I will try to find the answer for you and get back to you as soon as I can. So without anything else, I'll move on. Roberto, let's start with some of the impacts. So some of you might receive our member surveys. We survey members, quite regularly, and we're lucky that we actually did a survey in mid-February to find out what's happening with the restaurant industry. And this is before COVID came to New Brunswick. What we saw though was the economy starting to slow down. Nearly half operators said that the economy was slowing down and their same-store sales had dropped. This is most related to a high household debt and just a general slowing of the economy. There was very, very little impact of COVID in those declines. The only pockets where we saw some clear impacts on sales tended to be in Chinese communities in Vancouver or Toronto or Calgary, where it was the Chinese New Year, and most of those celebrations were curtailed or restricted because of what was happening in China. We then moved on and surveyed after the first 2 weeks of March. It happened to be the same weekend that government shut us down. Nearly 80% of operators said they had lower same-store sales. This was because we're starting to hear rumors of coronavirus, social distancing, not going out. People were getting concerned. The economy was starting to slow down. So we saw, quite a lot of operators report decline in sales. Moving on to the last 2 weeks of March, most businesses had been closed for 2 weeks. We had nearly 100% of operators report for the last 2 weeks of March and the first 2 weeks of April that their same-store sales are down, which is not surprising. I guess what I'd like to know, who were the 2% that who actually said their sales are up? It's hard to believe someone actually had higher sales in the first, in late March and early April. Moving on, Roberto. Just looking at some of the numbers, as I said earlier, the first half of March, where things are relatively normal, we saw overall about a 27% decrease in restaurant sales. The second half of March, we saw a 72% decline in sales, which worked out to March having a decline of roughly about 50%. What we're seeing is overall sales in New Brunswick into April are down about 80%. So that tends to be, full service restaurants who aren't doing takeout and delivery, they're down 100%. On the other hand, we have restaurants that are probably more in the quick service who are geared towards takeout and delivery. They're down in the range of 50%, 50 to 60%. Moving on, Roberto. At the same time, we also surveyed our members, and with this one is particularly is operators, independent operators at one location. When we surveyed them at the end of March, nearly 48% said they had temporarily closed their operation. We had about 40% who said they were continuing to operate with takeout and delivery only. And the shocking number is after 2 weeks, 8% had said they'd closed their doors permanently already. And about 5% after that were seasonal. Moving on, Roberto. Now I think I'll touch a little bit on some of the federal programs. Many of these you are completely familiar with. You and your staff probably have availed of them, but some of them are a little bit in flux, and I'll continue to try to explain them to the best of my ability. The first is a CERB. This is the $2,000 a month benefit for workers who lose their income as a result of COVID. It's only available for workers who are either laid off or do not have work. And this is something we worked on to say you cannot quit your job and collect CERB, because we were fearful that we would not be able to get employees that they could automatically just quit and pick this up. So that was one change that happened. I think what's also interesting about the CERB is that it's administered by the CRA, not EI or another organization. And the reason for that is to catch fraud. And if they spot fraud or they spot overpayment with the CERB, they'll make amends at tax time. The employees could be forced to pay back any CERB that they weren't entitled to when they pay their taxes. To qualify, you must have $5,000 of income in 2019. And another important change from the original CERB is that, what we were finding, even with the provisions about not being able to quit, we had employees that were hesitant to come back because you could not guarantee their hours. You may only had a few hours a week for them or a couple shifts. So we were able to get to change where you can earn up to $1,000 a month and still collect CERB. So that's quite important, we found, as the industry is transitioning away from closure to starting to use takeout and delivery, or those who are just trying to get by on takeout and delivery. Next up, Roberto. The CEBA, the Canadian Emergency Business Account. I think this is probably the most popular program for operators, or one of the most popular programs for operators. These are loans to small businesses in order to pay operating costs such as payroll, rent, utilities, insurance, property tax, or debt servicing, and it's 100% funded by the Government of Canada. You still have to go through your credit union or your bank, who has a final say on the approvals or whatnot based on your business case and how your business is operating or has operated in the past. The final decision is still with the banks. Initially, the program was open to employers who had a payroll between $20 and $1 million. We aggressively lobbied to have this expanded, and it was moved up to a payroll total of $1.5 million. And a second change that we also aggressively fought for was, as you know, many establishments that do over 50% of alcohol sales are generally not eligible for loans from the BDC. So we were able to get the provisions changed to allow this to happen with this benefit. If the operator pays back the money before December 31st, 2022, 25% or up to $10,000 will be forgiven, and the remainder will be converted to a 3-year term loan at 5%. This program has been rolled out, and it's my understanding many operators are now starting to receive some of the money from this. Next up, Roberto. EDC loan, this probably wouldn't impact most of the people on the call. It's really geared up for really large businesses. It allows loans up to $6.25 million. Next up, Roberto. This is the one that probably a lot of you have questions about. It was only announced just over a week ago, and the details are still being worked out by the federal government. It is not available now, but it will be available, we expect, in mid-May. So what this program will lower rent by 75% for small businesses that have been affected by COVID. It provides qualifying commercial property owners 50% of monthly rents for tenants who are experiencing hardship for the months of April, May, and June. To be eligible, tenants have to pay less than $50,000 per month in gross rent and have temporarily closed or experienced a 70% drop in COVID revenues. Under this program, landlords will be forgiven the loans that they had taken if they promise to reduce the rent for tenants by 75%. Tenants will still be required to pay 25%. I just got some clarity last night on a couple of details that you would be interested in that are new to us. As I said earlier, it's a $50,000 monthly gross rent per location, and that's defined as by valid and enforceable lease agreement. To qualify, they can generate no more than $20 million in gross annual revenues. And as I said, experience a 70% decline in pre-COVID revenue. So there's been also a lot of questions about how do you measure the 70%? So to measure the revenue loss, small businesses can compare revenues in April, May, and June of 2020 to that of the same months in 2019. You can also use an average of revenues earned in January and February of 2020 to measure your 70% decline. So check both of those methods to see which ones will work out for you best if you're on the bubble. The important part of this program is your landlord has to be willing to participate. Government cannot force it on the landlord. The federal government has tried to make this program as rich as possible by forgiving, by picking up 50% of the rent. They expect the landlord to pick up 25%, and they want the tenant to pick up 25%. And it's also a partnership with the provincial government, which New Brunswick government was one of the first to jump on board and say we are going to participate in this program because they understood how important this was to the small business tenants. Rent tends to be the #1 fixed cost for operators. Moving on, we have the wage subsidy. This, I think most of you probably have been looking at that this week. I think the doors opened on this on Monday. And this program is a 75% wage subsidy for businesses that saw a revenue drop of 30% or more during the COVID crisis. This program, once again, changed quite dramatically since it was originally announced. Originally, it was only a 10% wage subsidy. So they've come a long way from 10% to 75%. So once again, this, to measure your 30% decline, it's compared month over month to 2019, or you can average it over the January, February months of 2020 if you're a new business or it works out better for you. For March, you're only going to have to show a 15% decline because the restaurants were shut down midway through the month. What's important to know about the wage subsidy, and this is where there's been a lot of confusion, is when you read about it, it says a wage subsidy is open from March 15th until October 2020. That is correct. That is what the legislation says. However, at this point today, you are only eligible to use the wage subsidy from the period of March 15th until June 6th. Those are the only days on which government will provide you with the 75% subsidy. 12 weeks, and it's 12 weeks between those very specific days. They use the October date for a couple reasons. Number one, if they decide to extend the program past the June 6th date, it will allow them to do it without having to go back to Parliament, so they can just move that date. And secondly, what it also allows you, the operator, to do is you could apply in August retroactively for the wage subsidies for those dates in March, April, May, up until June 6th. So what some operators are doing, because it's a lot of concern of operators who shut down, they didn't have any wages in April, or maybe they only had 2 or 3 employees working in April, and they don't want to waste one of their some of their 12 weeks on a period where they had very little payroll. So some operators are waiting to hear if they're going to extend the program or until they have more employees to start claiming weeks. So, you're allowed to do it retroactively. So some are waiting to see if this program is extended, because our understanding is it's only going to be a 12-week period, even if it is extended. So you'd probably rather use those 12 weeks in higher volume months, such as June, July, and August, instead of April. So, I think you're going to buy yourself some time if you wait till, closer to June to see what's going to happen, because once again, you can always go back retroactively, but at this point, the only dates you're eligible to claim are March 15th to June 6th, but you can claim those weeks anytime between March 12th and October 2020. So I hope that's I hope that clarifies some of the misunderstanding. This is one of the issues that we are really lobbying hard on. is for an extension of this date because, as I said, most operators were closed in April or May, or if you're a seasonal operator, you're not opening until later in the year, and you just don't have the volumes. So the wage subsidy won't be that much help. We also think as an industry, we're going to need a lot of assistance during the reopening phase because volumes are going to be down. You're going to be restricted in terms of your capacity. So you're going to need that continued assistance even once we get past the crisis phase into the reopening phase. So this is something that we're going to hope, and we're working hard to hope that it stays. Another question we do get quite a bit about the wage subsidy is how it interacts with CERB. Because you're allowed to earn $1,000 a month and not impact the employee's CERB. An employee cannot collect CERB and the employer collect the wage subsidy for the same employee. So you cannot use the two programs at once. So if your employee is on CERB and working in your business, you cannot claim the wage subsidy for that person. So that is very clear in the guidelines that have been published, but it's a very common question we get. I guess now we can probably move on to the next one. Other federal government supports, HST remittances have been deferred until June 30th. That's quite important because it means you still have the money in your bank accounts. If that money is still sitting in your bank accounts, we're lobbying government to allow us to keep that money and use that money. Once it is remitted to government, it's gone and we'll never see it again. So as I said, right now it's only deferred. It's sitting in your accounts. We're hoping that you'll be able to keep that money. We're lobbying aggressively with the Hotel Association of Canada and the Tourism Association of Canada for that to happen. Income tax payments have been deferred until August 31st, and the work sharing program has been extended from 38 to 76 weeks. So those are some of the main federal government programs that impact employers. At this point, I'll move on to some of the New Brunswick supports. New Brunswick, was quite active and quick off the mark to get involved with Restaurants Canada and to try to help businesses and individuals impacted by COVID. The federal government programs took quite a long time to come. The New Brunswick government was quicker off the mark and really adjusted their programs to try to fill in any gaps created by the federal government. So, one thing that we were quite happy of and we lobbied aggressively for was when the emergency order came out, we wanted our restaurants to continue to stay open. And we were deemed an essential service. Now, this is really important because, for some operators, it's a key component of their business. And for others, it's just a mean to keep a few people employed, keep your business in hot idle instead of being, closed down completely. And there was really an important role for us to play. We quite often worked with the Trucking Association because we're essential for truckers on the road, for healthcare workers, for first responders, for those in self-quarantine. They needed us to be a channel for food service, so for food. So we are very pleased and happy to play this role. I know a lot of you had to juggle, and there are a lot of concerns from your staff and putting protective measures in place. And, the government really does appreciate the role that we are playing during this crisis. So I just want to make sure that you understood that government knows and understands what you guys are doing, or the industry's doing to support the community in the time of crisis. The first day after the VLTs were shut down, this is something I was quite pleased to do. It all started with a call from an operator on a Monday morning who said, government is going to do the sweep of the machines on Wednesday. It would be great if we could keep that money and use it for cash flow. And I spoke right away with the Deputy Minister of New Brunswick, and Atlantic Lottery and in the other 4 provinces. And within that afternoon, they had agreed that we could keep all of the money wagered for that week and use it for cash flow. And they're willing to work with us on repayment. And at this point, it seems repayment will be based on future commissions. You're not going to get a bill to say you owe all this money, pay us now. So they've been quite good to work with. A key thing that New Brunswick did that we're very, very pleased, and I want to highlight this one because New Brunswick is only one of 2 provinces to do this, is that the province put measures in place to protect commercial tenants from eviction. Your landlord cannot evict you as long as an emergency order is in place. And we thought this was a great tool to protect you, as well as to bring your landlord to the table to maybe have some discussions about waiving of rent or deferring of rent. So, I just wanted to highlight that New Brunswick is only one of 2 provinces to bring in such a measure. Another piece they brought in, and I know they were a little late to the dance on this one. This was to allow restaurants to sell alcohol with takeout and delivery. New Brunswick was the 8th province to bring this in. And there was a reason. They wanted to do it earlier. Unfortunately, the way the law is in New Brunswick, and I know those of you who are licensed realize how old and archaic the Liquor License Act is in New Brunswick. It requires a change in legislation in order to allow us to sell alcohol with takeout and delivery. And as you know, the legislature is not sitting in New Brunswick, has not sat in New Brunswick since the crisis. So, I give credit once again to government who worked closely with us and agreed to put it in the emergency order that we could sell alcohol with takeout and delivery. And I just want to spend a few seconds on this for those of you who are using it. I want to be clear, this is a temporary measure. We're only allowed to do it through the emergency order. It's not permanent, but government has told me they're willing to make it permanent. They will change the legislation once this crisis is open and the legislature sits. I guess my plea or my guidance to you as operators is we have to be careful as an industry not to screw it up. Let's don't have an incident happen, or we're doing something crazy like, filling a pop bottle full of pure rum and sending it out to a customer. If there's an incident or if something happens, government may not be so quick to legislate, because the way this is put in the emergency order right now, it is wide open. The only restriction is you can't sell to minors. So you're able to sell draft. There's no restrictions on price. There's no restrictions on anything except minors. But I'm just, asking you as industry leaders to ensure we're prudent, because, if we screw it up, they will not change the legislation and we will not get this passed. So that's just a word of caution. Also, the New Brunswick government did some changes to fees, taxes, and payments. All licenses, registrations, certificates were extended till June 2020. We're safe. Premiums were deferred for 3 months. If you all had any government loans, they were deferred for 6 months. They waived late fees on property taxes. So you now have, I think it's June. I'd have to get confused right now. They've waived any late fees on property taxes, and NB Payment has agreed to defer payments, power payments, on a case-by-case basis. Moving on to some of the assistance supports in New Brunswick. If you could move over, Roberto, they provided 2 types of loans. One was a working capital up to $100,000. This is through the government, and if you have between 1 and 50 employees, you're included, and you have to have sales less than $10 million. You must have explored all federal and commercial options first. And the secondly was was a working capital loan over $100,000, up to $1 million, and you have to go through Opportunities New Brunswick for that. And once again, you have to go through the commercial banks first. Next up, Roberto. So now that I've sort of highlighted the federal programs and the provincial programs, I want to talk to you a little bit about reopening. New Brunswick was the second province in the country to announce a reopening plan. And as you know, it's a 4-phase reopening plan based on colors: red, orange, yellow, and green. It includes physical distancing, health screenings, physical barriers, hand washing, surface cleaning, masks, face coverings, large-scale monitoring, testing, and contact tracing. Government has still have to lay out a lot of the provisions around these things, but all of their plans will cover that. Government says we're somewhere between the red and orange right now, and they've loosened restrictions, just a little bit. Under their plan, if after 2 to 4 weeks after the curve flattens, restaurants could be open. And in New Brunswick, it's looking quite good now. They've not had a large number of cases in the last week or two, and so the curve has flattened. And is our expectation that restaurants, as again, should be open in 2 to 4 weeks. And under the same plan, they talked about bars to be opened. Unfortunately, the Premier mentioned in his comments December. The actual guidelines say to be determined. What we were happy, we worked closely with government on this after announcement. We talked to public safety. And as you know, there's no such thing as a bar license in New Brunswick. There are different types of licenses, and operators carry, various different types of licenses. And so we were able to convince government that they will not set this bar on who can open 2 to 4 weeks from now based on their liquor license. It will be based purely on what activity, not your liquor license. So for example, if you have a lounge license, you will not be able to have a band and have a crowd of people up on a dance floor dancing. That will not be allowed at this point because of the restrictions on social distancing and other risk mitigation pleasures. But if you were that same establishment and you had a guitar player or band up there performing for you, and your customers are seated at the table with the proper social distancing, they could sit there and have their drink and stay in your establishment. So once again, the regulation will be based on the activity, not your liquor license. And we have had a number of questions on that, and I was happy to get government to clarify that because that's quite important. So 2 to 4 weeks from now, it doesn't matter if you have an eating establishment or a lounge license, you should be able to open, as long as you take the guidance from the province in terms of social distancing, restrictions, and risk mitigation. One more, please, Roberto. And the last part of my last slide, I just want to touch base on is continues in the reopening, and we are actively engaged with. We are actually engaged with the government of New Brunswick with on a reopening plan. So as late as this morning, we submitted to government a guidance plan. We need a little insight from government in terms of what they're requiring in terms of sanitation, capacities, hygiene, and from there we also submitted to them a best practices guideline of what restaurants can and should be able to do, while still adhering to their public health principles. We've asked them for comment and feedback, which they are keen to do, and from that we will develop for you a guide that will provide templates, checklists, and guidance for you as an operator on how you will be open when government loosens restrictions on your establishment and you're allowed to open. We hope to have this guide to you probably in the next week, and this will give you all you need to start mitigating your risks and allowing you to open under the government's public health guidelines. So, we're quite pleased to work with government on this. They were keen to work with us. And as I said, we hope to have this for you next week. I have a few questions here, so I think I'm going through them. So the first question was on insurance. Absolutely, that is an issue. But we've had several conversations with insurance companies. The biggest one people are looking for is business interruption. At this point, many of the insurance companies say that business interruption is defined as some sort of physical change, and therefore a pandemic doesn't count. However, I did see a number of operators who were able to get through, and you should all check and read your policies cover to cover, is they had provisions under their reputational clause in their policy where, something about a bad reputation had provisions that spoke to a pandemic or a disease, and therefore the insurance company had to pay. The other advice I'm getting from insurance industry insiders would be, they are, succumbing to pressure in terms of, from industries, from holders, and the bar is moving slowly. So you should keep after your broker. Your broker should keep after your insurance provider. Your broker works for you, and just document, and keep after them. The second guidance that we received is also, even in terms of your liability, all of you have, most of you have some pretty high liability based on, a lot of people in your dining rooms or serving alcohol in your establishment. That's higher risk. And, your risk, insurance is based on risk. And if that risk is not there, there's nothing for them to cover. So they should be able to go back and, they should be able to change or rebate you for some of your March, April, and maybe May's policies, where if your area of your establishment is not in use, you would have no risk associated with that in terms of liability, and you may be able to get a rebate. I'll give you a quick example. I heard a story on the news yesterday about auto insurance. I went to my auto insurance provider, and they said, "Oh yeah, you should be eligible," and I saved $600. So the same can be said with your bar, your restaurant. So it's something worth checking out. On a macro level, we are also, it is something on our list, and we've begun discussions with governments to see if there's a way we can, force the insurance companies somehow to pay up. So it's still a big area where there's not been a lot of satisfaction, but it's on our radar screen, and we want to try to get there. Question 2. Take dividends. At this point, so the question is about the wage subsidy. What happens to owners who don't take wages but take dividends? Do they qualify for the subsidy? At this point, they do not, but is our understanding that it's something the federal government is considering. Question 3. The 14-day wait period isn't clear when bringing people back. If you have been closed, so time to bring them back people is important. Okay, so the 14-day wait period is for the person on CERB, not for you, the operator, in terms of the wage subsidy. So my understanding is that, you can only qualify for CERB if you have 14 days without work. So that is up to your person on CERB in terms of their eligibility to qualify initially. But the wage subsidy, there's no waiting period with the wage subsidy. The key point is a person, once again, cannot get the wage subsidy and the CERB at the same time. Can hotels that are operating resume their meeting business provided they maintain the guidelines of hygiene and distances? Wow, quite honestly, I don't know the answer to that question. I'm happy to get some guidance from government on this. I am it's something I don't know about. If you want to send me an email with your question exactly in your email, I will check with government and get back to you. Question 5, based on what we know, is it possible to assume that NB could be the first province with dine-in open in Canada? You probably could. Right now, there's only 2 provinces in Atlantic Canada that have opened restaurants or given a date for restaurants. New Brunswick, we're talking 2 to 4 weeks away. PEI is floating a date of June 12th. So you would definitely be the first in Atlantic Canada. Nova Scotia does not have a reopening plan yet. Newfoundland will be announcing their reopening plan today, and I haven't seen the details. Ontario does not have a date yet, and I'm not quite sure on the other provinces, but I don't think they have dates. They're more, certain stages you can have an opening. So yes, New Brunswick could very well be one of the first provinces to open their dine-in sections. It's all going to depend on the curve and what's happening with the number of cases. I know the government is acutely aware of the international border because the U.S. is opening much more quickly, and New Brunswick is kind of unique in that you have a U.S. border where it's a little bit of the Wild West. You have Quebec where they've had a large number of cases in certain areas, and then you have PEI and Nova Scotia where the risk is a lot lower. There are some discussions going on about could they open the border between New Brunswick and PEI because you have very, very similar track records. So at that point, I've probably talked way too much and talked your ear off, but I really appreciate the opportunity to speak with you today. Once again, do not hesitate to send me a question. If I know the answer, I'll get back to you right away. If I don't, I'll tell you I don't know the answer, and I'll try to find it for you. I guess what I would ask you is, rest assured, Restaurants Canada is at the table with governments, at the federal level and the provincial level each and every day, trying to look after your interests. We appreciate the support you've given the organization during the years, and we want to give back and help you. I always appreciate feedback, insight. It always helps. So once again, thank you for joining me today, and good luck with the reopening. I hope that most, or if not all of you, can start to open in 2 to 4 weeks. The one other piece I will add, we are actually I did forget 2 things with the province. I am involved on a labor forum through the Department of Labor in terms of helping the tourism industry. So if you have any insight in terms of anything involved with the Department of Labor or training that could help our sector, I'd appreciate some feedback there. And we're also part of this is working. I'm also on a forum with the Department of Tourism that is looking at a marketing program for operations and facilities in New Brunswick. It's going to be more local based during the first phase to get New Brunswickers off their couches and back into their province. And, so look out for that program. It's something that we're working closely with the government on, as well as, the tourism, Department of Tourism is quite good gathering all the restaurants that are open that they can find and giving them to us so we can put them on CanadaTakeout.com, where we're trying to promote the takeout industry on every Wednesday, and going to a website and finding the restaurants that are open. So I hope your establishment's on it. It's CanadaTakeout.com, where if you enter your establishment, when people go in, put the postal code in, your restaurant will pop up. And our understanding it has really helped drive businesses that are open, and hopefully you'll take advantage of it. So with that, this time I'll really stop talking and let you guys get back to work. Thanks very much.